Hello there, and welcome to another interesting episode of the interview. Today, I'm so delighted to have a friend and a pharmacist that I'll be introducing shortly on this episode of the interview. So, I encourage you, as I always do, that you contribute, you participate, and you ask questions as these discussions go on. So, without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce my guest, and we start the conversation. Today, I'm so delighted to have Nevan Bello, who is a trained pharmacist. She is a fellow of the Public Health Pharmacist, West Africa, and also a member of the Nigerian Institute of Management. She is a consultant pharmacist with specialty on drug abuse and management. Ms. Bello is currently the head of the Inpatient and National Health Insurance Scheme at the Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory Administration in Abuja. She also wears many administrative caps in different organizations that time may not permit us to go into. I'm so delighted to have you join me today for this wonderful conversation.
It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
thank you so much. So we just dive into the conversation. I want us to start by talking about, war against fake drugs in Nigeria. In the past 2 decades or so, one of the wars that the Nigerian government has been fighting is the war against fake drugs. We all remember the late Professor Dora Akunyili for her doggedness in fighting this war when she led the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, also known as NAFDAC. Where is Nigeria currently, in this fight against the making and importation of fake drugs?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's a bit sad to say that the war started well, especially with Professor Dora Kinley late now, and we have gone. We started going well, and unfortunately took some steps backward. And I would say a lot of factors have affected that. Not because the pharmaceutical or the NDLEA or the federal government have not been working maybe as hard as then, but because we're working against many things, national issues that is fighting hard against the war for fake drugs. It's unfortunate that we've not been able to come up to be a really drug producing country. We're more into importation, and that's where we have a lot of fake coming in. And Nigeria has a very large population. So, with the economic situation of needing what we call generic drugs when it comes to brand names, let's say a pharmaceutical company manufactures a drug after all the clinical trials and it brings it out, it holds a patent for some years, at least 10 years. And while it holds that patent, the cost of that drug will be quite pricey. And so you start having generic brands being produced. So even at that, it's an opportunity to get cheaper brands of what we call bioequivalent drugs. But we are not into doing that so much in Nigeria. We're so much consuming as a nation. So we are vulnerable to having fake drugs, if you understand.
Hmm.
And our borders are not as tight as they are. We can see it's not only when it comes to drugs, many things just come into the country and we're not really controlling or we can't get a grip. I don't know if to say because of how large we are or the way we have a lot of borders, we're not getting a grip of everywhere from the control agencies that should, but it's still a problem. So it's still war. But the beautiful thing about it is Nigerians are more aware. They are more aware about what to look out for. And so, because we demand good services and we check out on our own selves, so from individual levels, the control fight is much. When we as pharmacists go out for campaigns and tell people not to buy drugs that are hawked, in the sun, on the streets, just in the open market, people are already aware. And what Professor Dora had done with all that awareness really stayed with people. So, on individual, levels, the war is being won. But nationally, we need to do more. So
You,
I
you,
think
you mentioned
that's it.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that most of the drugs that are being consumed in
Yes,
Nigeria are imported, right? Are not produced in Nigeria. What
yes.
accounts for that? Why we have pharmacists that are trained like you, and many of them, I have pharmacist friends that are very intelligent. Why our pharmaceutical? Don't we have pharmaceutical industry? The industry, is it not functioning? Is it the pharmacists? Is it the government? What's going on?
Okay. I'll start by saying, yeah, we're a lot here, all eager to make productions. The pharmaceutical companies we have here mainly do what we call packaging or tabletting or bottling. Because what we call APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, are not produced in Nigeria. In fact, I don't think in Africa we have more than one country that produces what we call active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. Most of the countries that produce them are in Asia, in Europe, and the Middle East, especially India, China. So we import most of the raw materials and the active drug itself and come here and put them together. So
Hmm,
because of that, we still have to depend on them for that first line. Do you understand? Every other thing
mhm,
is it's just like when you have a bottling company here or you have an assembly plant, and it takes effort to be able to be registered with what we call World Health Organization GMP, that good manufacturing practice. We have a few companies that have passed those tests, but they are not many. And even though the
hmm,
government is trying hard to boost the production power of these companies, it's still not enough. And we're not even doing as much as we should. We're just doing like little things in front. Let's say, antibiotic and other drug productions, we're not yet into them.
hmm,
And you know, everything about production, we still depend on oil, maybe. And we need to be able to have the environment to produce. Light is important. A lot of things to be able to set up an industry. Even the industries that are here, everything needs to go. Like I said, basically those raw materials, active ingredients that come in are not made here, and we
hmm,
have all it takes set, surprisingly, to
hmm,
do them.
mhm.
Yeah.
What percentage of the drugs that I hope I'm using the word drugs rightly?
Yes, you're right. You're right.
What percentage of drugs that Nigerians consume can you say is produced in Nigeria?
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 100, I don't want to use any arbitrary, but let me just put it in a range so that I'm not wrong. It's in the range of 10 to 15%.
That low. So
I'm
most
even being generous.
you have been generous. So I will say about 90% of the drugs that are consumed in Nigeria are imported.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
That's
At least let me make it in a statement like this. At least 90% of the drugs that we consume here are imported. Up to 60% of that drug, that is, before you get a whole product, 60% of that drug was imported out of the 90%, in fact out of 100%,
hmm,
because 60% of everything you would make that drug, even if you had to say it was 100% made here, 60% came from out of Nigeria.
Wow.
out of the shores of Africa, sef, most
Wow.
times.
Wow.
So, and you see, that was why even during the COVID period, we as pharmacists were already raising an alarm that we would have drug shortage if the world locks down, to an
Hmm.
extent that China, we couldn't get things from them, or from India, we were going to be in trouble.
Hmm.
Some of us that are a bit into production had to like step up our game. For example, we own Belvan is a company that produced hand sanitizers during the lockdown, because during that period the active ingredient was nowhere to be found. So sanitizers were not even in the country. And we're not having many people doing it. So about that time, even in Abuja and environs, we were practically just like the only 2 or 3 companies that were producing hand sanitizers before the government boosted other companies to produce,
Hmm.
and the excipients came in. If the lockdown was not taken up and we didn't get excipients, we still would not have been able to make
Hmm.
production. So
Wow.
I'm just giving an example for one product. So you can
Hmm.
imagine
Hmm.
other things, to the
Hmm.
extent that even containers, if not now, that some bad things actually help us to get right. So you
Hmm.
see now the country has started producing some other things that we weren't really venturing into producing, like containers that are suitable for pharmaceutical products, because getting them was becoming difficult. So it now opened the room for that production. So
So let me get it right. I hope I'm getting you right. It's not as if we don't
okay,
have the raw material, right? It's just
yeah,
that we are not
yeah.
producing some of these things.
Yes, and being able to take those raw materials to the international standard, that when you they come here for inspection, we can pass the test.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And for production in the pharmaceutical, right from your setting and set, that means right from the environment you choose for production to the kind of building, the kind of materials you use, the way you structure the building, architectural structure. You don't just take a building and let's say a two-story building, and just change it to an industry.
Hmm.
You have to
Hmm.
really plan, so that when they come for test, you didn't just makeshift this room to be this production room, and then everything needs to have a flow. It goes through a flow chart of standard operating procedures for every step, where your raw materials are kept, where they are processed, and first line of production, quality assurance, quality control, and test, and every other thing. So if we're used to all those are cutting corners, we definitely will not get it right with them, because once it doesn't pass the standard of the WHO GMP specifications, you don't get the certification to produce.
Hmm.
I'm sure you knew that a few years ago there's a company called Chief Pharmaceuticals. They passed the World Health GMP for production of some particular drugs. And for every drug you have to get your qualification. So they got for, I think, the oral rehydration salts and zinc and some other drugs. So, and like that, we have some other companies too that have passed that test.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. That's a little bit, it's encouraging on the one hand, but it's also scary on
Yes.
the other hand. I want us to
It's
switch
not
gears
scary.
to
If
talk.
we get our things right, it won't be scary. It's
That's
just
true.
getting to learn to do things just the right way from the very beginning. And the
That's
willpower, yeah. If we keep depending on oil like we do, we don't see those areas as so necessary, since we can get them cheaply. Then we won't move from where we are.
hmm.
But if we put up our minds, both from the government, the willpower, and individuals, to be able to invest into that field, we'll get it right. Those that
Hmm.
have gotten it right they didn't come from the moon, and they started one day.
That's true. That's true. That's quite true. I want us to switch gears and talk about something that is actually your specialty, which is this issue of substance abuse.
Very.
Substance abuse seems to be becoming an epidemic in Nigeria, especially among the youth. Let's start with the basics. What is substance abuse?
Well, substance abuse, we use that word in public health because the general term is drug abuse. But we call it substance because apart from pharmaceutical drugs or any, a drug is actually any chemical or biological substance that changes the function of the system. So any substance that actually alters the way you behave, especially your mood, your perception, or your thinking, and you depend on that substance to an extent that when you, even when you know that it has detrimental effect on your health, you still can't do without it, is substance abuse.
Hmm. So people can virtually abuse anything. So can I
Yes.
abuse food? Can food become substance abuse?
Yes.
My favorite meal.
You get to a point you call addiction, and it's part of an abuse. Like the first statement I always tell young people is too much of everything is bad. So anything that goes beyond control will now become toxic to you, no matter how good it is.
Hmm.
If you take too much of vitamin C, you end up with kidney stones. So, as much as it's good to help your immunity, somewhere to have a toxic effect. So, there's always a line, there's always a thin line between good and bad, harmful and beneficial.
So, substance abuse is probably the general or umbrella term.
Yes,
Drug abuse will actually fit under, it's a subset of substance
yes,
abuse generally.
yes, substance.
All right.
Because Seth, we have substances, unthinkable substances that people abuse. So you can't call it drug, you can't call it food.
Give some
When
examples.
Wow, when a young person is taking urine and fermenting it for 2 weeks to take, you know,
People do
or
that.
yes, or grinding lizard feces, or I could take paint and inhale. You scrape the wall, you break the fumes of the gas chamber of an air conditioner. You use aerosols, body sprays, methylated spirit, dye, this dye that ladies wear with the hydrogen peroxide in it, you chemical, and several things.
Wow.
They're
So
actually substances.
people
So
do these
scorpion
things to
scorpion
themselves.
sting, there are a lot. I'm just mentioning them. Pineapple, plantain peel, newspaper, they're substances. So we can't call them drugs. We can't classify them as food, but they're all abused. So it's
Hmm.
unfortunate. It's unfortunate
That's that's
when young people
that's
when young people that should be using, the inquisitive abilities that God gave them in that teenage adolescent age to make good inventions, that intuition, that creative skill that is being developed are not being used right. And
hmm,
I always just wish it was just channeled for something better.
hmm.
So
That's
it's really
yeah, some of
bad.
those examples are really, really scary that people do that to themselves. I mean, it doesn't make
Yeah,
sense that people take some of those
it
things.
doesn't. It
Uh,
doesn't. That's
the
what
reason,
that's what happens when the brain is derailed, because substance abuse, actually, the way I bring it down to understandable language for young people is a passenger you picked in your bus
hmm,
that turned out to be the hijacker of that bus and become the driver and tell you what to do.
hmm,
When the kidnappers or the terrorists puts the gun on you and tell you move here, so you're not the one now detecting the pace. That substance takes over your brain function, because drug abuse actually does not only change the function, it actually changes even the structure of the brain to begin to think that this is just what is right. So you get to tolerance points, you get to points that, then you get to the addictive points, and then where we call withdrawal symptom point, where even at that point you know that now I want to stop, but because of the harmful side effects of trying to stop, you tell yourself, I would rather just stick in here than die. because sometimes trying to even come out is life threatening.
Hmm.
So you find some people at that pitiful stage where they see themselves, I want to stop. They'll be wondering, why don't you just stop? But it's actually hard then. And that's when we tell people to give as much support as they can. Because at that point, that person can't help him or herself. They
Hmm.
need an intervention.
Hmm. Wow. Did recent years have seen a startling rise in drug abuse in Nigeria? Do you mind sharing the current
Yeah.
statistics?
Hmm. Okay. From the last survey that was done, ably funded by the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, UNODC, in partnership with the European Union, we have in 20 between 2016 and 2018 have about 180 million people abusing drugs in Nigeria between the ages of
Hmm.
16 and 60.
Excuse
So
me, say that number again.
at least
What's the population of Nigeria?
about 180 million people have abused drugs
Out of 200
between the ages
million
of 50.
population?
Yes, yes. We, as in, even if it's what we call, even if it's a once a lifetime event, we have whether pharmaceutical prescribed drugs or non-prescribed drugs or substances. So it's really bad, and we're
Can
having
we
death
say,
tolls right.
go ahead, please.
Okay, we're having death tolls rising. Only that unfortunately, research is still ongoing so that we can have data from Nigeria. You know, most times we depend on data from other countries to be able to ascertain what we are. But Nigeria is such a large country now that we need to be able to share data. So we and other organizations too, NGOs, CSOs, funded by EU and UNODC, Nigerian Ministry of Health, are also working hard with NDLEA to be able to get data on substance use, because if it's not reported, you really can't capture. And if you don't have enough centers that people can come in to report, you know, either a relative or the person himself coming in, checking in for treatment, you won't be able to capture that data, and we can't just presume. So, but one on one, what we see around, there are many indications that we have drug overdose deaths, but not really captured on paper. So it's really growing. It's growing. It's
That that
growing.
is so, that is so scary because we are talking about a country that has about 200 million people, and over 100 million have abused
Yeah.
drugs at one point or another. That, for me, half of the population or more than half of the population, that is so scary. It's like you are sitting on a time bomb. And
Yeah.
do we know this based on these statistics? Though you said Nigeria is trying to do
No, please,
its own,
sorry.
findings.
Yes. Yes. Set that statistics I gave you, please, is on the world scale, not based on Nigerians' population, please.
Okay, it's on a world scale.
World
Okay,
scale,
all right,
yes.
all
Please,
right.
not
That makes
Nigeria.
all right.
Yes.
That makes sense. All right, that
Yes.
makes sense. And do we know?
That's
Talking
on the
about
world.
Nigeria specifically, do we know the percentage in Nigeria?
It's somewhere around 1.2 million
Okay,
people.
1.2 million.
Between 800,000, 1.2 million.
All right, all right.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
bringing my heart was already palpitating based on the previous.
Yeah, but you know that it's actually it's even more than that. But that's where it is, where we have statistics for.
All right, all
It's
right.
actually more than that. Yeah,
So,
we had a local research in Abuja, and it showed 1 in 6 young people abusing drugs
1 in 6.
in Abuja and its environs. So yes, and I won't even be surprised if it's as low as 1 in 3 now.
then that is still that takes me back to my previous, permutation. That is very scary. Even if it's 1 in 10,
It's
that is
that
very,
bad. That bad.
even 1 in 10 is still
It's that
scary.
bad.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Wow.
bad. And it's cutting across both male and female. Now, when we used to know drug abuse growing up, it was mainly in one side of the gender, But now it's cutting across because there are substances now and places where you don't need to be victimized or criticized to use those drugs.
Hmm,
For
hmm,
example, if you have to use shisha is seen as a social drug. And both male and female are not criticized using it. It's actually even used in some social gatherings, or you go to some lounges and you find them using.
hmm.
Hello, are we there?
Yes, I'm here. You are breaking a little bit, but I'm
Hello?
here. I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
when you
just go
have
ahead.
substances like prescription, okay, I mentioned shisha, which both male and female are actually feeling very comfortable using. And you know that smoking shisha for an hour is equivalent to smoking almost 100 sticks of cigarette, of which young people may or may not know, or may disguise and let the adults feel that no, it's just flavored smoke, but it's as good as smoking cigarettes, which is harmful to the health. And World Health has let us know that we should know that. Now, another drug could be prescription drugs, the pain killers like tramadol, codeine, which recently NAFDAC have been doing their best. In fact, the current DG of NAFDAC and NDLEA are really working hard. Sometimes you see them working, but you think they're not doing much. It's because the monster is really big. So, cutting slice by slice may look like no effort is being done, but they are really doing what they can do. I can't say best. With drugs like that, tramadol, codeine, going, being purchased, it's easy to just hide it and indulge. So that's why I said both male and females are getting as much involved into some types of substance use that are very harmful and are easily marked, what the young people say coded. So it's
Hmm.
easy to just hide, under odorless things that are no more in green bottles, big green bottles, or smelling, that you will know that this person is on drugs. You take those substances and no smell is coming from you just see the mood changes and the behavior changes. So, and if you're not really taking note, that young person may already have gone far, and it will really take an effort now to bring the person back. So it's really getting wild.
Hmm.
And they're not growing they're not seeing, I won't say it's totally anybody's responsibility to give you hope, but what's around the environment is not encouraging enough. And unfortunately, we call them the millennials. They are in a generation, or they have a characteristics of being short in, how will I call it, delayed gratification. They're in the quick fix generation, and so when they can get things done, they they easily get depressed. They are more into anxiety. The social media and many other things are factors that contribute to the fact that they are not as settled as they should be mentally.
Hmm.
And many of them quickly snap in between, drug use, suicide, just giving up easily. And we have a
What
lot of
other
work.
factors? Yeah, what other?
to do on that set
Yeah.
a lot.
What other factors do we know contribute to the high rise in drug abuse in Nigeria? Can you hear me?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Nevan?
Yeah, the economy contributes, economic situations. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. It's better now. Yeah, go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead, please.
okay, okay. I was mentioning that economic situations can predispose one to substance abuse, and I actually put it on both on the side of poverty and on the side of extreme wealth.
Hmm. Uh,
For those, hello,
Yes, the network is a little bit breaking a little bit. Can you hear me?
hello.
Yes, can you hear me? Right, we seem to be having some technical glitches there. We've been having a conversation with Nevan. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear. I can.
Oh, all right, go ahead. Go ahead. You were making a point about the economic situation.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. For some people, being poor could actually make them vulnerable to go into drug use
Hmm.
because they could either start by peddling to ease off when they get into full blow. We have the people who are affluent and maybe due to exposure to finances around and poor parental monitoring. You know, sometimes when parents are even busy, they try to compensate their children by giving them financial bonuses to compensate for their absence. So, when children are idle and having maybe money to play with, they could be introduced into it. And if they're vulnerable, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it's breaking a little bit, but
Hello, can you hear me?
yeah, it keeps breaking a little bit, but just keep talking. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So talking about that economic part, I also went into parental neglect, which is a
Hmm.
paramount issue. 90% of drug use stems from the home, either from
Hmm.
a parent using or, and you know, once parents is using it, you're already predisposed genetically. Then socially, it's an example, and the areas people live in can affect a child either to go into drug use or not to go into drug use. If you live in an area where there is ease of access and a lot of peddlers, it's a risk factor.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of all those issues, peer influence. For a young person growing, you know that the teenage adolescent, they are also transiting from being kids to to somewhere adult. I tell young people, you're just in a confused state because you're not a kid anymore and you're not yet an adult. And the brain of a young person doesn't get fully matured until he or she gets to 21. So as much as a young teenager tells you, I know what I'm doing, doesn't actually know what he's doing. And I tell parents when we go into counseling or we have programs, that's not the time to let a child be. You're not going to be hard on that child that time, and you're not going to let loose that child, because the child needs guidance, but the child doesn't need pressure. So at that point, you're a parent friend. You have to be firm and have to be soft with a lot of
Hmm.
understanding. And
Hmm.
God helps us to lead in those places because you can't actually give a formula for it. So going back to young people, because the brain is developing that time, they are already vulnerable to mental issues. There's high expectation. They are trying to determine their identity. They are trying to choose peer. They may be going into relationships. They're changing schools. They're making decisions about subjects, curriculum, career, you know, taking up more subjects in school. And it's all putting pressure on them mentally. So it predisposes them. And a young person has a high expectation on him or herself first before he begins to think that there's a lot of expectation from my parents, even when there's no pressure
Hmm.
or seeming
Hmm.
pressure. So because of that, they're already tensed up. Then with that tension comes anxiety and maybe possibly depression. And I was having a seminar two years ago, and I was letting those professionals know that even as parents, we need to go back to toddler age when children begin to throw tantrums or seem to solve a problem in a very harsh or you know angry way. Let's say you just got your ball of thread muddled up and you see a small child getting so angry and just throws in everything, gets angry, kicks at everything. That's a bad sign of what we call borderline personality disorder, or what we call the antisocial personality disorder. When children are not trained, we're all trained. Our parents taught us in a way, unconsciously they were teaching us that no, you don't solve it like this, calm down and sort it out this way. So all those things we went through was a training to be able to grow up into young adults or the teenage age and pass that age to adults who can solve problems no matter what life throws at you. So when or too bad, they end up with problems of anxiety,
Hmm.
depression, and even suicidal ideation. Some may not get into what we call attempt, because we have suicide ideations, then to suicide attempts, then to classic suicidal completion. So, but
Hmm.
some just stop at ideation. This kind, if I can't get it right, then it's not worth living for. Then you'll be wondering, why should a child? I remember while we were growing up, there was a young boy who promised or betted with, I don't know the right English word. He made a bet with his friends that he was going to come out with straight A1s. And the results came out, and he actually made all A's, but not all A1s. Set that guy killed himself in the bathtub of his parents' house.
Hmm.
He actually
Hmm.
took, that rat poison and stabbed himself in the tub with loud music on and killed himself. So, as flimsy as it seems, that's how the young mind works. If a young mind cannot see life as this serenity prayer I take some people through, being able to accept some things the way they are, life doesn't have to be hard and fast.
Hmm.
We have principles, and as much as possible want to live the ideal, but live in the real world. And if things don't go our way, we don't have to smash ourselves. But some people actually smash themselves that hard, as in death,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
So that's how bad it is. And because we also live in a society where people don't air out their views again, everybody seems to be a okay. we don't talk as much as we used to. So you
mm,
see, the virtual world is taking over the real world set,
mm,
unfortunately. It's good
that's
that I
true.
can talk to you online
That's
here,
yeah.
but when you find people on the other side being together in a room and everybody's consumed on his phone, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because we don't do this face heart to heart talk again. Sometimes I
Mm,
scold people on one side saying it's because of the way we gossip around, we take people's gist everywhere. We actually just spread it around, and then people now begin to hoard their problems. That's one side that makes people not to talk. But on the other side, I tell people speak up when you need to. There's someone, it may not be everybody, there's someone that will genuinely listen, that will genuinely be there for you. And because if we don't talk, we bottle up. There's something I used to hear older people talk when we were young. Something in Hausa they used to say, chiki banang abinci kawai ba. You know, that statement is a heavy statement. That means people keep things, isn't it? And
mm,
bottling up. Just think of putrefaction. Think of what happens to the sockaway or your sink or a pond. You know, if it doesn't have an outlet, you know what happens. From everything that putrefies, it becomes toxic. Even that container will burst open.
mm,
And
mm,
you know what it takes to clean a rotten place, to take an effort. Sometimes it's as bad as cancer.
mm,
I'm doing a psychological research to show that some cancers people have, some ulcers people have, actually, yes, research has shown that many of them stem from emotional or psychological problems. But sometimes I'm finding more reasons to prove that from unforgiveness, from resentment, from different things, people are growing into physical sickness, just not
mm,
mental, that
mm,
are death threatening. So
mm,
let me not go spiritual, but there are many things that if you don't let go, forgiveness is setting a prisoner free and finding out that prisoner was first of all you.
mm,
And once you can let out, it makes life easier. So you see,
mm,
before someone gets to a suicide point, and unfortunately, the trend from suicide ideation to attempt to full blown suicide is a fast swipe. So you
mm,
just wonder, when did this person start thinking of this? But when they were giving classic symptoms, you were not seeing. So when the manifestation comes, it's just a free slide, you know, and it just happens from the ideation to the attempt to the classic demonstration of a suicide. But it came from something being bottled up, isn't it? It came from the
mhm,
thought of, I'm not worth living. The world is better off without me. I've tried and I've failed. There's nobody that cares. It just comes from this. Why is it only me? Whether the person was sexually abused, or there was domestic violence, or seeing the parents being divorced, or being rejected by friends or a relationship, or not achieving a goal set. So it just comes from different things. And when there's no stopper from maybe the words of someone or a situational change, then it just gets there.
you know,
And I just wanted, no, let me let you talk.
growing up, we hardly heard about cases, about suicidal cases. I don't know where you
Mm,
grew up, but our generation, we
yes, it's the
suicide
same.
cases were not suicide cases were not rampant, right? You hardly,
Yeah,
I can't even trying to remember now. I can't remember hearing someone taking their lives, but
that's
it's
true.
becoming rampant now. So you mentioned one of the factors, maybe technology and social media and all these other things. Do we know other factors that may be contributing to the rise of suicide globally and specifically in Nigeria?
Okay, there could be genetic links too. to suicide.
Hmm.
If you have somebody, close family or relative that have had it, it may be a sign that there is a genetic trait of mental instability in the family.
Hmm.
So, apart from genetics, like I said, the adolescent age itself, economic issues are triggers too. They are risk factors. But you
Hmm.
see, with all the economic, environmental, social issues, set it still stems to the individual history of growing up. In
Hmm.
psychology, we have what we call set and setting. Set is your genetic background. Setting could be where you grow up, the environment you were set in. So some people, even when they didn't have it as a genetic trait, they found themselves maybe growing up with people who didn't care or who abused them, either domestic abuse, beating, verbal, or sexual abuse.
Hmm.
You understand?
Mhm.
And let me give you one trend. Let me just take one trend to a stage, and maybe we'll understand. You have a scenario maybe of a 3-year-old girl who had been molested or maybe raped. At that age, she may not really know. She grew into 5 years old and maybe went to a foster home or stayed with her grandma or her uncle or a stepfather and was seeing herself being raped, maybe daily or weekly. Maybe she was moved to cousins and still had the same thing happening to her. She got to, let's say, age 12 and ran out of the house and maybe living on the streets and fell into the arms of a drug dealer that offered to take her in and peddled her maybe for sex and drugs. And maybe she ended up pregnant or married an abuser too. Do you see where the life goes in? And
Hmm.
maybe I would say between 12 and 18, she started what we call self harming. Maybe started cutting herself with knives. And all this is a response to pain.
Hmm.
And we've started having to do some seminars on pain management or anger management because if you can't manage these emotions, you could either have them go that bad.
Hmm.
So when you see somebody responding like that, or let's say it's a male that was abused sexually when he was growing up, if he didn't have help or any fatherly figure to help, he could grow up to also be a rapist or a molester or a pedophile. So it always stems from an emotional damage, something that wasn't set right from as early as it should be. There's actually no late time for help, but we should be able to detect where the root cause is.
Hmm.
There's
What
always
are
a
some?
root cause.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
What are some of?
said.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was just asking, what did you say?
Yeah. So the question I want to know is what are some of the basic signs of suicide, and how can it be prevented?
The first sign I will give is withdrawal,
Hmm.
alienation. The person will first go antisocial, will first want, because to execute that plan, it's between you and yourself and whatever things are going on within your mind. That's the only congregation or audience that need to execute that plan. So that person first goes into self isolation, you know, begins to, you find when you bump into that person and the person is actually trying to readjust or trying to hide something, you should begin to take note. Doesn't like public gatherings, doesn't want to be with family or friends, gets moody, gets cranky easily, or sometimes they may just even very unlikely seem happy because they may have decoded somewhere to execute their plan or something that could help them. Then you find signs of Statements of recline, as in bland, like giving up, like there's no use. No, you guys will soon um, be free of me and my troubles, or I'm going for a long journey. I don't know when I'm going to return. Or there's nothing worth it. I'm tired. Things like that are signs of despair, which could actually be deeper than just being, in a state of despair. It could actually be a suicidal ideation phase. And the person can be helped at any stage.
So I guess the question is, if we begin to see some of these signs, how do you prevent that? How do you go about preventing that?
You know, the mind is about very cheaply talk, what we call psychotherapy. And God has given all of us that ability
Hmm.
to speak, to share, to encourage, to dissuade any bad action. There could be somebody that could just say something, and then another person, not even knowing what the situation was, like, no, you're more than this. And that could have just been enough to stop
Hmm. Hmm.
a chain of activities that was going on.
Hmm.
Don't think that way. You're way better. Someone just told someone, I love you. And that was all. It changed the whole narrative. I heard
Hmm.
a story of a man that got diagnosed with cancer, and when he got to the hospital and was told about his situation and all that he was going to, fortunately, he was even in a developed country that everything was going to be available. For some of us here, hearing a medical condition is actually a death sentence on its own, because you think of the finances, you think of, the facility. How will I even, you know? So, but for him, he was even in a place where they had given him all the options, how his treatments were going to be like. And for him, he just felt everything was cumbersome and he couldn't even take it. So, on his way out of the hospital, he made up his mind he was just going to drive into the sea and end it there. But you know what happened to him? It was a thought that crossed his mind, the thought of his little daughter always at his door to welcome him.
Hmm.
And it was almost like the daughter's face and voice flashed in front of the dashboard. And that was what dissuaded him at the bank of that water. So,
Hmm.
there's always help at any point. Even at the very last point of hanging, some people have even just put the rope on themselves or have taken the pills and were saved by a knock, you know, by just something. But the first very effective is psychotherapy. And if the person can't come up, for those of us around, can bring it up. Yeah, there may be denial at first that everything is okay. But with watchful, for some people, just the fact that somebody is watching out for them can change the situation. But
Hmm.
funny enough, very trickily, for those who really want to commit, it's such a bad, heavy, maybe I'll just call it the spirit. It's so heavy that it makes them very tricky, that they actually want to dodge the people that really care for them. You're watching out for them, they'll wait for you to have gone out or just easily slip away, and then they quickly want to do the act. But it takes practical love, as in that follow up, to be able to follow up someone who is on harm's way, to bring the
Hmm.
person back lovingly.
Hmm.
And that's the
You,
sacrifice of a friend, even if it's a family member.
at some point, you mentioned, the various stages of suicide. You talked about things like ideation and what have you. I can remember that. But I just want to
Yes.
know, are there situations of, let's say, sudden suicide, that can suicide just take place? just in a matter of minutes. Somebody has not previously thought about it, and all of a sudden
No,
they are committing suicide.
no, it can't. It can't.
Hmm.
It's just the act, the final act that happens in minutes. But these arrangements in the mind of that victim has occurred for a minimum of 6 months.
Hmm.
That's why you see, when we do a clinical diagnosis of depression, it's actually something that has exceeded 3 weeks. Then you say the person is classically depressed. That's the signs of being moody, being down, not wanting to eat, or eating too much, or not being interested in anything until you get to that point. And another thing is drug abuse, substance abuse itself. Many of the drugs and substances people use actually have the side effect of suicide ideation,
Hmm.
because at the times when the effect of those drugs, the euphoria wears off, you're actually down to a bad mood. And that's what keeps people on the vicious circle of drug abuse, wanting to always be happy and depending on something to make you happy. Because once they are not on that substance, they are not happy.
Hmm.
When we tell people, whether young or old, that alcohol does not take your problems away. When you have a problem, you'll be like, wait, first, let me go and chill. You know, you come back after the effect of alcohol and your problems are staring at you. Like, let's talk. And if you don't talk, you go back there again. You come back and meet him waiting, let's talk. So sometimes I always say the way out of a problem most times is through it. But many of us want to dodge
Hmm.
and go around and still come back to it. And may even end up in a web that was worse than the problem you were trying to run away from.
Hmm.
So when you're on substances, whether prescription drugs, opioids, or heroin or whatever, alcohol. In fact, statistics have showed that alcohol has the highest influence on suicide ideations.
Oh
Funny
wow.
enough, even more than the heroin that you would think, or methamphetamine. But almost all of them have suicidal ideations as a side effect.
Hmm.
So if if I'm going to be high on something and then the next minute when I'm not high on it, I'm thinking of taking my life, then, but like we always say, it's prevention. When they're in that situation, nothing makes sense. All we're saying doesn't make sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
So suicide,
Wow.
like you said from the beginning, let me make it a statement. A suicide act did not just happen. Starting from ideation did not start in minutes. Ideations can last for from 6 months to a year, 2 years, 10 years before an attempt. Some people don't graduate from having the idea, because ideation just means you're having an idea. It would be nice if I just end. Oh, it would be so sweet. People may actually be so happy if I'm not here again. I would even rest, you know? So those are ideations. Some people don't ever leave the realm of ideation to an attempt. And some people stay in the realm of attempts maybe the whole of their lives, because some people may have one, two, three failed attempts and may give up at that point. It's embarrassing because the world doesn't tolerate suicide. When you fail an attempt, you actually get lashed by everybody, you know? Nobody just pities you. Everybody like, how could you do such a thing? What did you do? So when a second attempt when that coup is going to be planned, they will actually plan it in a way that it should succeed, it shouldn't fail. But some people are lucky to fail as many times as they attempt, and some people are not lucky to get it right or wrong the very first time they attempt. So it
Hmm.
actually comes to a full blown act. So
Hmm.
these stages don't take minutes. No, no.
What's your general advice to people that out there, maybe feeling depressed, some of them mental illness, which is also a big thing, I believe, that is connected to suicide and all kinds of things. What would be your advice, even as we try to wrap up? What would be your advice generally to both people that may be considering suicide or nursing it in their minds, and also people around how to pay attention to some of these clues?
Okay. The first thing I would like to say is let's speak up. It's okay not to be okay.
Hmm.
And when you're not okay, you don't have to be like everybody. Say it the way it is. Everybody may not be listening, but there'll be one person at least that will listen to you. And please, let's be our brother's keepers. Let's watch out. It's not enough to just ask a blanket question: is everything fine? You know, we could go the step further to really care. To really care. That's the basics. The third thing I'll say is life isn't doesn't have to be as hard as we take it to be. Just like the serenity prayer says, let's have the grace to be able to accept some things the way they are, knowing that we have a higher power, God, controlling us and setting the pace of our lives. We can't set the pace for ourselves and expect everything to go the way we want it to go. Keeping hope alive is like the major string we have hanging to life. Because once you have hope, there's actually life. So please, whatever we're going through, you're not the first person that has gone through it. You won't be the last. History actually just repeats itself, and you will come through. Most times, the hardest time is just before the break of dawn. And if we can just hang in there, no matter how long it seems, we'll see light at the end of the tunnel. And I always say this set: God didn't make us as islands. That's why He put us into families. Families so that in this colony we call Earth, we can survive. We're social beings. Nobody's an island. If you go into that cave, you will drown. So we should always be open enough to give a bit of our lives out. And in so doing, we can receive warmth. There's still goodness, even in this rotten state we're in. There's still goodness.
Hmm.
There's still goodness. And there's hope. So we shouldn't give up.
What a perfect way to end this program. Thank you so much, Nevan, for making time to be part of this conversation. You
It's
spoke
so
on a number of
refreshing.
things
Thank
that
you
are
so much.
very important, and I really appreciate your time. And
Thank
for all of you that watch and contributed and participated in one way or another, until I come your way next time with another interesting episode of the interview, watch out for tomorrow. I have another interesting guest. I will be posting the, I've been, putting the poster out, flyer out there shortly. Until I come your way next time, thank you so much and bye for now.
you. Bye.